Hey, my name is Bo. I'm a musician and music teacher. And in this video, I want to talk about building habits as a musician. And so there are three books out there right now. James Clear's Atomic Habits, BJ Fogg's book, Tiny Habits, and Stephen Guys's book, Mini Habits. And these books are all really saying the same thing. They're all wonderful. I recommend reading them all. They all have a little bit of a different spin, but they have the same spirit that taking small actions and building habits out of small actions can have a transformative effect on whatever you're trying to do in your life. And I want to just riff off this for a little bit and talk about how I've applied this as a music teacher and as a musician myself in my own practice sessions. So the basic idea in all these books is that when you build habits, it ends up being easier to maintain activities. And so there are studies and numbers thrown around about a certain percentage of what we do during the day is run off of habit. You brush your teeth, you take your dog out, you feed your dog, you text certain people during the day, you listen to music or a podcast on the way to work. A lot of what we do is habitual, and we can actually take advantage of this process of our brain kind of putting certain things on autopilot, and we can take advantage of this by thinking about the things that we value and the goals that we have and the things that we care about in life, and trying to install more habits that kind of move us in the right direction. And so each one of these books has a slightly different spin on how to do this, but they're really all coming from the same place. And the place is noticing that there's a very weird behavioral observation. So for a lot of people, when they set a very big goal, they get all jacked up and fired up about it. 2025, I'm going to learn how to play piano. Let's go. And then after 3 weeks, they stop playing, right? And so, they sign up for an app and they learn something, and then, they're all jacked up, and for 1 or 2 hours a day, they're learning piano. And then after 3 weeks, it just kind of stops, right? And so we see this pattern with a lot of things. People do this with fitness. People do this with dieting. People do this with instruments. People do this with all kinds of stuff. Hobbies, projects at work. People will start big, crazy projects in the new year. And then by the time you hit February or March, they're not really working on them anymore. And that's because that kind of grand goal strategy for many people, I'm not saying for everyone, that grand goal strategy, it often doesn't actually lead to long-term behavioral change. What it tends to lead to is a giant spike in motivation at the beginning, because to start something like that, you need to be super fired up. And that's wonderful. I think if you're super fired up and you want to do something positive for your life, use that fuel. Practice 2 hours a day if you want to. There's nothing wrong with that. That's great. But the real problem comes from when you make a commitment to yourself in that high state of intrinsic motivation, that high state of kind of infatuation and even obsession, it's probably not sustainable. So if you say, I'm a new piano player, I'm going to practice every day for 2 hours, and let's go. Now, a lot of people have they have kind of a motivational window of, I've just noticed 6 weeks. And this is a very interesting, I don't think they talk about this in any of those books. This is just my own observation. People kind of have a 6-week window. So they'll often be crazy fired up about something for 2 or 3 weeks, and then it trails off a bit in week 4 or 5, and something around week 6, it's just gone. And so that's just kind of the natural cycle for how a lot of people's motivational structure works. They read about something, they get interested in something, they have about 6 weeks of fuel in it. And so what I've done in my life is I know that can happen. I can get very interested in something, and I don't make long-term commitments unless I know this is something that is going to be a long-term interest. And so if I have a passing interest, I just treat it as a passing interest until that window has passed, and then I reassess where I'm at. But there's another strategy that you can take advantage of, and this is what all these books are talking about, is that when you commit to very tiny daily actions, it kind of hijacks and bypasses the weird motivational structure that human beings have. So we have this, let's use a more music-specific example. So let's say I want to learn, my second instrument is piano. So this is a good example. I want to learn how to play a bunch of Bach inventions on the piano. And that's actually a goal of mine right now. I'm learning all of the Bach inventions. I'm just slowly kind of plunking my way through them. Now, if I was to make a goal in a high state of kind of interest or motivation, I could commit to an hour a day, 2 hours a day. But I know that that's not going to be sustainable. I know I'm not going to be able to fit that into my guitar practice that I tend to care more about, and my teaching and all that kind of stuff. And so if I was going to follow the advice of one of these books, I would make a tiny habit about this. I would say every morning before I go to work, right before I walk out the front door, I'm going to play 1 minute of a Bach convention. Or I'm even better, I'm going to learn one bar of a Bach convention. Something that seems obnoxiously small. And the reason that we do this is that when we have this motivational spike and we're crazy interested, I mean, you could run through a concrete wall. You know, you could practice for 4 hours. That's not the problem. I'm not saying that doesn't happen. But once we start running out of motivation, even just practicing for 10 or 15 minutes can actually feel like a gargantuan task. And I think this happens to beginners a lot of the time. They really want to set a goal to practice for a half an hour or an hour a day, and they just can't get themselves to do it. And they may not have a lot of sophisticated behavioral strategies to get themselves to do it. And so you can kind of short fuse this whole weird motivational structure that we have by committing to something that is absurdly small. Because when you commit to something that's absurdly small, let's say, you know, I do an hour of guitar practice, half an hour and an hour in the morning, and then I want to do another half an hour on the piano, but I'm just not feeling it. I mean, that's not a very good feeling. It doesn't feel very successful. But instead, if after my guitar practice, I just say I have to do one bar of this Bach piece, what tends to happen is that now starts to get installed as a habit. And I will stop developing resistance towards that. It'll start to get normal for me to do that. Some days I might get into it and play for like 10 minutes. Some days I might get into it and do like 20 minutes. But you have to kind of reorient your thinking about what the real problem is. The real problem is not that, you know, you can't do it for an hour or whatever. You could probably force yourself to do it for an hour. And there's better and worse ways to do that, to kind of get yourself to do it. But the real problem for learning an instrument or, you know, teaching in a certain way, like maybe you're a music teacher and you want to start applying some kind of new teaching technique, but you're having problems sticking with it. What tends to happen is that, again, people go all in for like a couple weeks and then they just fizzle out. Instead of allowing that to happen, what you do is you commit to something very small that is not really going to be an obstacle when you don't feel like doing it. And that's the hack. And all three of these books talk about this in the same way. And you can think of countless ways you can implement this. I mean, I am a professional musician, and so I have install habits where I can practice for a couple hours every day, and it's not really a big deal. But even within that couple hour structure, I can still take advantage of this tiny habits approach. I can say, okay, you know what? I'm not spending much time working on new rhythmic stuff, and I find myself avoiding it. I mean, I'm super motivated to work on any kind of harmonic thing, but I'm not working on any rhythmic stuff or any rhythmic concepts to any great degree. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to install a tiny habit. And I think the best way to install these tiny habits is to kind of fuse it with a part of your day that already happens regularly. So I used the example earlier, every day before I go to work, I'm going to play one bar of this Bach piece. You know, every day before I go to work, I'm going to work on some rhythmic thing for 1 or 2 minutes. And so there's really two components to the strategy, is choosing when you're going to do it and finding a place for that in your life. But then also making the daily minimum super, super low. So low that on your worst day, when you have no motivation and you're in a bad mood and you have a headache, you could do this for 20 seconds or for 30 seconds. And what this does is it just makes sure that this stays in your life and it gets the chance to grow. And so you're just planting seeds here. And, you know, certain kinds of seeds need different amounts of time to grow. So my 1 bar of Bach a day, that might not turn into me working on 20 minutes of Bach every day for months and months. And that's why a lot of people basically fail to build habits, is because we can't control how long it will take to build into a true kind of durable habit. And it's a much better strategy in the beginning to just make sure that it's staying in your life. And so there's so many ways you can use this as a musician. Anything that you want to work on, audiation stuff, ear training, maybe you want to keep a practice journal. Like I said before, maybe you're a music teacher and I don't know, you're getting into like direct instruction or some of the other crazy things I've talked about on this channel. Make a tiny habit about doing that. Or maybe you're a music teacher and you've never tracked what you work on with your students. Make a tiny habit that says, every time I start a lesson with a student, I will at least open up the Google Doc or the Apple Notes or whatever you're using and at least write the date and their name. So something very, very small. And this is where the haters start to come in. And, you know, the hater might be part of your own mind where you start to think, or someone else says, yeah, but that's not really going to matter. It's not going to matter if you work on one bar of a Bach piece every day. You got to do 20 minutes or 15 minutes or an hour or something like that. And you can kind of hypnotize yourself or get hypnotized if people are actually doing this to you to think that working on something for 1 minute doesn't matter. But again, when you have that mindset that 1 minute of practice doesn't matter, you're not seeing the bigger picture. The bigger picture isn't that it's a big deal to skip today. It's totally not a problem. You could practice Bach pieces once a week. I'm not saying you have to do habits every day, but the bigger picture is that it's so easy to give up on things, and we often give up on things because our motivational structure, aka our emotions, is not in tune with what our goals are. And so rather than kind of giving up on things, we just make a small commitment. And this small commitment is much easier to maintain over long periods of time. And that's basically it. I mean, I would recommend reading all 3 of these books, but that is the basic strategy. Find something out that you care, find what you care about doing. So maybe, and in this case, musically, so it could be, you know, learning to read sheet music, ear training. It doesn't even matter. There's so many things you can think of doing. Commit to a very small version of it. So something that would take 10 to 30 seconds. I mean, maybe even a minute. If you're thinking like, I'm going to practice for 5 minutes, I could see how that would sound tiny enough. But remember, we're choosing a daily minimum that is so small that on like one of the worst days of the year when you have a migraine, you could still show up and do this. And so it's about just maintaining consistency. On any one day, if you want to blow the goal out of the water and do half an hour, that's fine. You have that goal. And so this is just a strategy that works super, super well. I've implemented it with all different parts of my life. But to be honest, I was very surprised with how well this works musically, because I thought that, well, I'm, you know, a classical guitarist and a jazz guitarist. I already practice for a few hours every day. This tiny habits thing is not really going to help me, but it helped me work on individual components of music that I was kind of avoiding, or it helped me organize certain things better. And so, I mean, a great example of this in my life is I started making little recordings, ear training recordings, where I would play one chord progression and then play another chord progression, and I would keep going back and forth between the two and kind of quiz myself on them. And my tiny habit was to listen to this 1 minute every day in the car. And this has actually turned into a huge part of my day. Now when I commute to work, I do this usually for anywhere from 15 to 20 minutes on the way there, and then 15 or 20 minutes on the way back. And now I do it on breaks at work too. For a few minutes here and there, I get 2 15-minute breaks and a lunch break. I'm doing this all the time now. And it literally just started from me committing to a 1 minute a day habit. Now, some habits are not going to naturally explode that big. If they're things that are really challenging or really hard for you to do, or you don't like them, they might not naturally explode like that. But I wanted to do this for a long time. I just wasn't actually showing up. And it was this stupid little tiny habit that just put this seedling in my life. And this thing just exploded over the past few months. And now it's a normal part of my day. I don't even think about it. I mean, it's really benefited my musical development. So that's just like a crash course on my experience with tiny habits and atomic habits and all these kinds of books. If you have any questions or comments, you know what to do down below. My name is Bo. What do I teach? I teach piano and guitar online. So if you're interested, shoot me an email. But thanks so much for tuning in and have a wonderful day.